This wonderful statement guarantees that man cannot help but know the right steps to take and the right decisions to make. It is not a case of God knowing all the answers and man being in the dark. God is forever pouring His thoughts and judgments into our waiting consciousness, inspiring us with right ideas. It is the great light of truth which illumines our pathway so completely that we cannot help but see the right turn to take or the right decision to make. Moreover, Divine Mind literally points out to us which is the best of all His infinite opportunities. And what's more, your Heavenly Father takes you by the hand and leads the way. Thus, anyone rejoicing that love inspires, illumines, designates, and leads the way just can't escape doing the right thing for Him to do. So, how do we know what is God's will and what is not? That is the beauty of love's inspiration, illumination, and designation. When God's purpose is revealed, the way is so clear, so certain, that not only are we sure of it, but we are led, impelled, and even compelled to take it. It is at this point in our demonstration where we must refuse to become discouraged if we see no signs or have had no leadings. Even though we haven't had any indication that things are happening, we know that they are. Don't forget that our God is a divinely active God, forever expressing Himself. Therefore, now and always, wonderful things are happening. And regardless of whether we see any evidence of it or not, continue in rejoicing that right now, God's plan is in operation. Right now, wonderful things are taking place. Why, right now God can be opening the way for that individual in California to come to your home and offer to buy that property that you so want to sell. Right at this instant, God may be working things out in New York City, whereby an organization will find it possible to ask you to fill a position that is far beyond anything that you have ever dreamed of. Discouragement closes the door on illumination, inspiration, and designation. But courage and confidence that wonderful things are happening leaves all the doors wide open for wonderful things to happen and for us to be aware of God's guidance. A young man had worked several weeks along these lines in order to find just the right job. However, nothing that had developed that was in keeping with his talents and abilities. But he was so sure, so certain, so positive that God's plan was in operation and that wonderful things were happening, that he was not the least bit unhappy or disturbed, worried or fearful. And one day he was impelled to go to a nearby town and apply for a position with an organization that he hadn't even thought of before. Well, they had a position for him, and it was far more wonderful than anything that he had dreamed of. After they had guaranteed him the position, they said to him, "How did you happen to come in today? If you had come in yesterday, the position wouldn't have been open yet. If you had come tomorrow, we'd have already filled it with one of our own employees. How was it that you happened to come today?" The young man's reply was, "Only God knows. All I know was that I was impelled to come." However, this young man told me later that he had realized that it was because he had stood steadfast in his joy and in his certainty that wonderful things were happening that he was able to hear the voice of God, able to feel the directive impulse. He said that if he had ever become worried or discouraged or unhappy, he wouldn't have been in tune with the infinite, and he'd probably still be looking for another job. Fourth, divine principle puts God's plan for man into operation, and there is no other power or presence to interfere with it, one iota. This is the last point, but it is a tremendously important one. It is because of the operation of principle, which is the law, the way, the order of things, that there is absolutely no possibility of there being any other law to interfere with the operation of God's plan. Referring to this omnipotent power of divine principle, Mrs. Eddy says in Miscellany, page 174, lines 10 through 12, let us open our affections to the principle that moves all in harmony, from the falling of a sparrow to the rolling of a world. There can be no circumstance so great that principle cannot compass it. There can be no need so insignificant that principle cannot provide for it. Therefore, let us follow Mrs. Eddy's admonition to open our affection to principle. Let us love, worship, and adore that supreme power which holds the universe in place. Let us revere the law which annihilates the possibility of there being any law to the contrary. There can be no medical law to interfere with God's plan for you, no law of lack or access, no law of false theology. Even a lack of education cannot interfere with God's plan for man, because the infinite power of divine principle is putting God's plan into operation. Before the presence of divine principle, all intolerance, bigotry, misconceptions, and even human opinions become as nothing, as a thing of naught. Remember, it is divine principle that does all the placing, all the arranging, all the planning, all the relating and association, all the organizing, all the balancing, all the motivating. No wonder there's nothing to interfere with God's plan. One day, I'd been working particularly with the second point. Refusing to outline, I just finished praying. Heavenly Father, I don't care whether I dig gold in Alaska, lasso cattle in Argentina, scrub floors in a benevolent association, or take in washings in Timbuktu. All that I ask is that your plan for me be in operation. After that, a friend of mine dropped in. She was worried and fearful. She had all the symptoms of cancer, and though she had done quite a lot of praying in Christian Science, the condition had grown steadily worse. I asked her, what was it that she was rebellious about, unhappy about, disturbed about? She admitted that she was all three of these things, because her husband just sat around in front of the television set and did nothing. Upon questioning her, I learned that for many years her husband had handled a business successfully for her and her family. Finally, he had sold it for them at a profit. Now what he wanted to do was to move to California, build a hotel and operate it. But this lady did not want to have anything to do with a motel, and she certainly didn't want to move to California.